They were born on the same day, in the same hour, in the same bed. But what the Hartwell family of Wilkes County, Georgia never told anyone, what they tried desperately to hide behind closed doors and whispered prayers, was that Margaret and Catherine Hartwell were not simply twins. They were something else entirely, something the modern world has no name for, though the old world had many. And by the time the town of Washington discovered the truth, it was already far too late to save them, or anyone else. This is the story of what happened in that white plantation house in 1862, when the Civil War was tearing the nation apart. But the real war, the one that mattered, was being fought in a nursery room behind locked doors, while something that wore the faces of two infant girls grew stronger with each passing day. You need to understand something about Wilkes County in 1862. This was old Georgia, not the Georgia of Atlanta's rise or Sherman's fires. This was plantation country, where families like the Hartwells had roots that stretched back to before the Revolution. The Hartwell estate sat on 300 acres of cotton and timber, worked by 47 enslaved people whose names were recorded in ledgers, but whose voices were not. The main house was Georgian colonial, 3 stories of white columns and black shutters, with gardens that had once been featured in Southern agricultural journals. It was a place of order, of hierarchy, of rules that everyone understood. Dr. Edmund Hartwell understood rules better than most. He was a physician, trained at the Medical College of Georgia, a man who believed in science and reason and the immutable laws of nature. His wife, Constance, was the daughter of a Charleston shipping magnate, educated in literature and music, fluent in French. They were rational people. Modern people, by the standards of 1862. They did not believe in superstition or folklore or the whispered warnings that the enslaved women shared in the quarters after dark. They should have listened. The twins were born on February 14, 1862, during an ice storm that knocked down power lines and broke tree branches across the county. The midwife, a free woman of color named Judith Crane, was the only one present besides Dr. Hartwell himself. The birth was difficult. Constance hemorrhaged badly, and there were moments when Edmund thought he would lose her. But both mother and children survived, and when the dawn came, they had 2 daughters. Judith Crane never spoke publicly about what she saw that night. But 3 weeks later, she sold her property in Washington, Georgia for half its value and moved to Savannah. She told her sister only one thing before she left. Those children share more than blood. They share something else, something I won't name. God help that family. The first indication that something was wrong came when the girls were 3 weeks old. Dr. Hartwell noted it in his personal journal, which was discovered in 1923 in the basement of the old Wilkes County Courthouse, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden inside a sealed tin box. The journal entries from March 1862 are methodical, clinical, the observations of a trained physician trying to make sense of something that defied medical understanding. March 7, 1862. An unusual synchronicity has developed between Margaret and Catherine. When one cries, the other responds within seconds, though they are in separate cribs on opposite sides of the nursery. When one sleeps, the other also sleeps. When one wakes, both wake. Constance believes this is natural for twins. I am not convinced. March 12, 1862. Today I conducted an experiment. With Constance out of the house, I had the nurse take Catherine downstairs to the parlor, while Margaret remained in the nursery. I then pricked Margaret's foot with a sterile lancet to draw blood for examination. Margaret cried, as expected. But from downstairs came Catherine's cry, at the precise same moment. The nurse reports that Catherine pulled her own foot back, as if she too had been pricked, though the nurse had not touched her. March 18, 1862. I no longer conduct experiments. Constance forbids it, and I confess I have lost my appetite for this investigation. There is something unnatural in the connection between the girls. Today, when Catherine laughed at a toy, Margaret laughed simultaneously, though Margaret was facing the wall and could not see the toy. Their laughter had the same pitch, the same rhythm, the same duration. It was like hearing one voice from 2 mouths. By April, the synchronicity had deepened. The girls began to mirror each other's movements with unsettling precision. When one raised her left hand, the other raised her right, creating perfect symmetry. When one turned her head, the other turned in exactly the opposite direction, as if they were reflections in a mirror that existed in some dimension beyond the physical. Dr. Hartwell consulted medical texts. He wrote to colleagues at the Medical College of Georgia, describing the symptoms in careful, clinical language, avoiding any suggestion of the supernatural. One colleague wrote back suggesting that conjoined twins who had been separated might display similar sympathetic responses. But Margaret and Catherine had never been conjoined. They were separate infants, sleeping in separate cribs, being fed by separate wet nurses. They were separate, weren't they? The wet nurses noticed it first. Both women, Rose and Penny, enslaved women from the quarters who had given birth within weeks of the Hartwell twins, reported the same disturbing phenomenon. When nursing one twin, they could feel the other twin's hunger, as if the infant at the breast was somehow also the infant still in the crib. Rose described it as, quote, feeding two mouths with one body, and refused to continue after a month. Penny lasted only 2 weeks longer before she too begged to be reassigned to other duties. Constance Hartwell began nursing the twins herself, despite the social impropriety. She never explained why, but her personal correspondence with her sister in Charleston, letters that survived the war and were donated to the Georgia Historical Society in 1954, suggests that she had discovered something that the wet nurses had only sensed. Dearest Sarah, she wrote in May 1862, I cannot explain what I experience when I nurse the girls. It is as though I am feeding not two children, but one consciousness that exists in two bodies. When Margaret drinks, Catherine's throat moves in the same rhythm, though Catherine may be in her crib across the room. When I hold Catherine, I can feel Margaret's heartbeat, though Margaret is not touching me. They are separate, Sarah, but they are also one. I do not know what they are. I only know that I love them, and I am terrified. The summer of 1862 brought the war closer to Wilkes County. Confederate defeats at Shiloh and New Orleans had shifted the momentum, and there was talk of Union forces pushing into Georgia within the year. Dr. Hartwell, at 43, was too old for conscription, but he had been pressed into service treating wounded soldiers who were sent back from Virginia and Tennessee. The Hartwell plantation became an informal hospital, with the front parlor and dining room converted into wards for convalescing men. This meant strangers in the house. Men who had seen things in battle, men who carried their own traumas and superstitions, and these men began to notice the twins. Private James Wickham, recovering from a leg wound received at Shiloh, was the first to speak up. He had been given a room on the second floor, across the hall from the nursery. In late June, he approached Dr. Hartwell with a request to be moved to the quarters, to sleep with the enslaved men rather than in the house. When pressed, he admitted that he could not sleep because of the sounds from the nursery. It ain't natural, Doctor, Wickham said, according to Dr. Hartwell's journal entry from June 24th. I hear them babies, and they ain't crying like normal babies. They're talking to each other, but not with words. It's like singing, but wrong. Like they're the same voice split in two, and they're trying to come back together. I seen enough horrors in Tennessee, Doctor. I don't need to see what's going to happen when they succeed. Dr. Hartwell dismissed Wickham's concerns as the ravings of a traumatized soldier, but other men made similar reports. Lieutenant Benjamin Shaw, who had studied at Princeton before the war, took a more analytical approach. He had been trained in natural philosophy and had a keen interest in scientific anomalies. He asked permission to observe the twins under controlled conditions. Dr. Hartwell, desperate for a rational explanation, agreed. Shaw's observations, recorded in letters to his wife that were later published in a collection of Civil War correspondence in 1889, are chilling in their precision. He spent 3 days observing Margaret and Catherine, now 4 months old, taking notes every 15 minutes on their behavior and interactions. They move as one organism, Shaw wrote, not in imitation, but in true synchrony. I conducted a test. I had one child taken to the opposite end of the house, into a room where she could not possibly hear or see her sister. Then I observed the remaining child. When the distant child was startled by a loud noise, the child in my presence startled at exactly the same moment. When the distant child was given a toy, the child with me reached for an invisible object in the same manner, most disturbing. When I asked the nurse to cover the distant child's eyes, the child in my presence began to cry and covered her own eyes with her hands, though I had done nothing to her. Shaw's conclusion, written in a final letter to his wife before he returned to his regiment. These are not two children, my dearest. They are two halves of something that should never have been split. Or perhaps they are two prisons for something that should never have been born. I do not know which. I only know that I fear what will happen when they grow old enough to understand what they are. Shaw died at Gettysburg in July 1863, but his observations reached other people, and rumors began to spread through Washington, Georgia, that the Hartwell twins were not natural children, but something cursed, something evil. The Hartwells tried to suppress the rumors. They stopped allowing wounded soldiers in the house. They dismissed servants who gossiped. They kept the twins isolated in the nursery, with only Constance and Dr. Hartwell permitted to enter without supervision. But isolation only made things worse, because by the fall of 1862, Margaret and Catherine had begun to speak. Not in words. They were only 7 months old, far too young for speech, but they made sounds to each other. Vocalizations that seemed to carry meaning, to convey complex ideas. And these sounds were perfectly synchronized, so that when one twin made a noise, the other made the same noise at the same pitch and duration, creating a harmonic effect that was beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. Dr. Hartwell recorded one such episode in his journal on October 15, 1862. Tonight I heard the girls singing. There is no other word for it. They were lying in their cribs, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, producing a series of notes that rose and fell in an almost musical pattern. But the sound was wrong. It was as if a single voice had been split and sent through two channels simultaneously, creating an effect that no human voice should be able to produce. Constance begged me to make them stop, but when I entered the nursery, they both turned to look at me, and the sound ceased immediately. They smiled, the same smile, at the same angle, with the same expression, and I knew in that moment that they were aware. Not just of me, but of themselves, of what they are. What they are. Dr. Hartwell never explicitly stated what he believed the twins to be, but his journal entries become increasingly desperate, increasingly unscientific. He began consulting books that had nothing to do with medicine, books about folklore, about demonology, about ancient beliefs in doubles and doppelgangers. He corresponded with a professor at the University of Virginia who specialized in occult phenomena, describing the twins' condition in vague terms, seeking any explanation that might make sense. The professor's response, dated November 3, 1862, still exists in the University of Virginia archives. Dr. Hartwell, if your description is accurate, then you are dealing with a phenomenon that ancient cultures recognized but modern science has forgotten. The Greeks called it a shared pneuma, a single soul distributed across multiple bodies. The Norse spoke of fetch twins, children who were born as one consciousness in two forms, and who could never be truly separated, because they had never been truly individual. If this is what your daughters are, then I can offer no medical advice, only a warning. Such beings do not remain passive. They seek wholeness. They will attempt to merge, in whatever way they can, and when they do, something new will emerge, something that has never existed before. Dr. Hartwell burned that letter, but he copied the essential passages into his journal first. The winter of 1862 to 1863 was brutal in Georgia. Ice storms knocked out telegraph lines. Roads became impassable. The Hartwell plantation was effectively isolated from December through February, with only occasional supply runs into Washington when the weather cleared. During those long winter months, something changed in the nursery. The twins, now nearly a year old, began to develop new abilities. Or perhaps they had always had these abilities, and were only now strong enough to manifest them. It started with movement. Constance noticed that objects in the nursery would shift position overnight. A rattle would move from one side of the room to the other. A blanket would be found folded when it had been left crumpled. At first, she blamed the servants. But when she locked the nursery door at night and checked in the morning, the phenomenon continued. Objects still moved, as if invisible hands were rearranging them. Then came the incident with the mirror. The nursery had a large standing mirror, a gift from Constance's mother, positioned near the window to catch morning light. On January 12, 1863, Constance entered the nursery to find both twins standing before the mirror, though neither could yet walk unassisted. They were holding hands, facing their reflection, and they were perfectly still, not swaying, not moving, not even breathing visibly, just staring at themselves in the glass. Constance screamed. The sound broke whatever trance held the twins, and they both fell backwards onto the carpet, crying like normal children. But when Constance approached the mirror, she saw something that made her back away in horror. The reflection was wrong. In the mirror, the twins were still standing, still holding hands, still staring out. Their reflections had not fallen when the real children fell. For just a moment, perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, the reflection and reality were separate. Then the reflected children slowly faded, like dissipating smoke, until the mirror showed only the empty nursery and Constance's own terrified face. Dr. Hartwell tried to explain it as a trick of light, a momentary illusion caused by stress and poor sleep, but that night he covered the mirror with a heavy cloth, and he ordered all other mirrors removed from the second floor. The twins screamed for hours after the mirrors were removed, not the crying of frustrated infants, but genuine screams of anguish, as if something vital had been taken from them. They screamed in perfect unison, the same note held for impossible durations, until servants fled the house covering their ears, until Dr. Hartwell himself considered abandoning his home and his daughters. The screaming only stopped when Constance, exhausted and desperate, brought the mirror back into the nursery. After that, the Hartwells never again tried to remove it. The mirror remained, and the twins spent hours before it each day, staring at their reflection, sometimes reaching out to touch the glass, sometimes just standing in that unnatural stillness that was worse than any tantrum. What were they seeing in the mirror? What were they seeking? Dr. Hartwell's journal provides a possible answer. In an entry dated February 14, 1863, exactly 1 year after the twins' birth. I believe they are trying to remember what they were before they were separated. Or perhaps they are trying to see what they will become when they merge again. Constance thinks I have gone mad. Perhaps I have, but I watch them at the mirror, and I see the way their reflections sometimes move independently, the way their reflected selves seem more real than their physical bodies, and I wonder, which version is the truth? The 2 children I can touch, or the single being I see in the glass? By the spring of 1863, the situation had become unsustainable. The twins were now 14 months old, and their abilities had grown stronger. They could move objects without touching them. Small objects at first, then larger ones. A wooden block would slide across the floor as both twins stared at it. A book would tumble from a shelf when both twins raised their hands in unison. The synchronization between them had become so complete that it was often impossible to tell which twin had initiated an action, because both acted simultaneously. More disturbing were the moments when they seemed to occupy the same space. Servants reported seeing one twin in 2 places at once, at the window and by the door, in her crib, and on the floor. These sightings were always brief, just a flicker, but multiple people reported the same phenomenon. It was as if the twins were beginning to blur, to lose their distinct boundaries, to bleed into each other across space. Dr. Hartwell knew he needed help. But what kind of help? Medical science had no framework for what his daughters were. The church offered only condemnation and talk of exorcism. He was alone with his knowledge, alone with his burden, and his daughters were growing stronger every day. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In April 1863, an elderly woman arrived at the plantation. She gave her name as Abigail Worthington, and she claimed to be a distant cousin of Constance's mother's family. She was gaunt and severe, dressed in black mourning clothes despite the spring warmth, and she carried with her a leather satchel filled with old books and journals. She asked to see the twins. Dr. Hartwell refused at first, But Abigail was persistent, and she said something that made him reconsider. "I knew another pair like them, in Massachusetts, in 1831. They died when they were 3 years old, but before they died, I learned things. I wrote them down, and I've spent 30 years trying to understand what they were." Dr. Hartwell let her in. Abigail Worthington spent 3 days observing Margaret and Catherine. She took no notes, asked no questions, simply watched as the twins played, slept, ate, and spent their long hours before the mirror. On the 3rd day, she asked to speak with Dr. Hartwell privately. What she told him was recorded in his journal, though the entry is fragmented and difficult to read, as if written in haste or extreme agitation. She says they are split births, a term from old European folklore. Not twins in the conventional sense, but a single soul that fractured during the moment of incarnation, creating 2 bodies but maintaining one consciousness. She says it happens rarely, perhaps once in several generations, and it is always recognized by the same signs: perfect synchronization, shared sensations, the ability to exist in 2 places simultaneously. She says the children are not evil, but they are not entirely human either. They are something in between, something transitional. I asked her what happens as they grow. She would not answer directly. She only said that the children always try to merge, that they cannot help it, because they know on some level beyond conscious thought that they are incomplete. She said the Massachusetts twins tried to merge by drowning themselves together in a pond, holding each other under water until both died. She said there have been other cases, other methods, but the result is always the same. Both children die, and sometimes something else is briefly released before it too dissipates. She called it the unified self, the thing that exists between them, the thing that they are trying to become. Abigail Worthington left the plantation the next morning. She told Dr. Hartwell only one more thing, standing in the front hall as her carriage was prepared. "You cannot prevent what's coming. You can only choose whether to witness it or flee from it. But know this, when they merge, when they finally become what they are meant to be, the result may not be what you expect. Sometimes the unified self is stable. Sometimes it's not. And sometimes, Dr. Hartwell, sometimes it's hungry." She never returned. Dr. Hartwell wrote to the address she had provided in Boston, but his letters went unanswered. Later investigation by historical researchers in the 1920s found no record of an Abigail Worthington in Boston census records or church registries. If she existed at all, she left no trace beyond Dr. Hartwell's account. The summer of 1863 brought Sherman's army closer to Georgia, though the actual march to the sea would not begin until the following year. Raiding parties and skirmishes had already reached the outskirts of Wilkes County. Dr. Hartwell sent most of his enslaved workers away, giving them papers of manumission, keeping only a few house servants who refused to leave. He knew that the plantation's days were numbered, that the old order was collapsing. But he could not leave his daughters. The twins were now 17 months old. They walked, though they moved in perfect tandem, their steps synchronized down to the inch. They had not developed speech, but they continued their harmonic vocalizations, creating sounds that seemed to bypass language entirely and convey meaning through pure emotion and intent. They rarely left the nursery, and they spent most of their waking hours before the mirror. Constance had stopped sleeping. She sat in a chair in the nursery, watching the twins, terrified to look away. Her letters to her sister became increasingly frantic. "They are changing, Sarah. Their faces are becoming more similar, even though they started as fraternal rather than identical twins. It is as if they are adjusting themselves, molding their physical forms to match each other more precisely. Yesterday, I swear to you, Sarah, I saw Margaret's face flicker and become Catherine's face, just for a moment. When I blinked, it was Margaret again, but I saw it. They are merging, Sarah, not all at once, but slowly, in pieces. What will be left when they finish?" On August 12, 1863, something happened that forced Dr. Hartwell to make a terrible decision. He was in his study when he heard Constance scream. He ran upstairs to find her standing in the hallway outside the nursery, staring through the open door. Inside, the twins were before the mirror, as always. But this time, their reflection was moving independently, performing actions that the physical twins were not performing. The reflected children were reaching toward each other, their hands passing through the glass surface, while the real twins stood still and watched. As Dr. Hartwell watched, frozen in the doorway, the reflected children began to merge. Their hands connected through the glass, and then their arms, and then their bodies began to overlap, to fuse, to become a single form. The real twins, still standing before the mirror, began to shake. Blood trickled from their noses. Their eyes rolled back in their heads. Dr. Hartwell acted on instinct. He grabbed the heavy cloth he kept beside the door and threw it over the mirror, breaking the line of sight between the twins and their reflection. The moment the cloth fell, both twins collapsed to the floor, unconscious but breathing. When they woke, hours later, they were different. The synchronization was still there, but it was less precise, as if something had been disrupted. They looked around the nursery with expressions of confusion, and for the first time in their lives, they did not immediately locate each other. It was as if the interruption of their merging process had temporarily severed whatever connected them. But Dr. Hartwell knew it was only temporary. And he knew that the next time they attempted to merge, he might not be there to stop them. That night he made his decision. He took his journal, his correspondence, all his notes about the twins, and he sealed them in the tin box that would not be discovered for 60 years. Then he wrote a letter to his colleague in Virginia, the one who had warned him about split births. The letter was brief. I am going to separate them. I know it will kill them both, because they share one life between two bodies. But I cannot allow them to complete their merging. God forgive me. The next day, August 13th, 1863, Dr. Hartwell took Catherine to his sister's plantation in South Carolina, a journey of 2 days by carriage. Constance remained at home with Margaret, sedated with laudanum, to keep her from understanding what was happening. Dr. Hartwell told his sister nothing except that Catherine needed to stay with her temporarily for medical reasons, and that under no circumstances should anyone allow her to see a mirror. He returned to Georgia on August 15th. Both twins, now 300 miles apart, had fallen into comas within hours of separation. They did not eat, did not wake, barely breathed. Dr. Hartwell sat between them, his journals tell us, traveling back and forth every 3 days, watching both children die slowly, each in a different house, each calling out in their sleep, with the same voice, the same words in a language he did not recognize. On September 2nd, 1863, at 3 a.m, Margaret Hartwell stopped breathing. In South Carolina, witnesses reported that Catherine stopped breathing at the exact same moment. Both were pronounced dead at dawn. The synchronicity held even in death. Dr. Hartwell had both bodies brought to the plantation. He buried them in the family cemetery, in separate graves on opposite sides of the plot, as far apart as the cemetery fence allowed. He placed no markers on the graves. He told no one where his daughters were buried, not even Constance, who had collapsed into grief madness and had to be institutionalized in a private hospital in Charleston. Then he burned the nursery, the mirror, the cribs, the toys, everything. He set fire to the entire second floor of the house and watched it burn. The local fire brigade came, but Dr. Hartwell sent them away. He let his house burn until only the ground floor remained. He never spoke of his daughters again. But the story did not end with the twins' death. Because 3 weeks after they were buried, strange reports began to emerge from the plantation. Servants who remained on the property, those who had nowhere else to go as the war raged around them, reported seeing 2 girls in the ruins of the house. The girls appeared at twilight, dressed in white gowns, standing where the nursery had been. They were holding hands. They were always holding hands. And they were smiling, the same smile, at the same angle, with the same expression. The sightings continued through the fall and winter. Local people began to avoid the Hartwell property, calling it cursed, claiming that the twins, spirits, had not departed but had instead merged after death into something that lingered between worlds, neither fully alive nor fully gone. Some claim to hear singing from the ruins at night, that same harmonic vocalization the twins had made in life, rising and falling in an almost musical pattern. Dr. Hartwell himself disappeared in March 1864. His body was found 3 days later in the burned ruins of the nursery, positioned between the 2 points where the cribs had once stood, his arms outstretched as if he had been embracing something. There were no marks on his body, no signs of violence. The coroner ruled it death by natural causes, though Edmund Hartwell was only 45 years old and had been in good health. His journal was never found in his possession. He must have hidden it before his death, perhaps knowing that what he had witnessed needed to be recorded, but fearing what would happen if the wrong people discovered the truth about his daughters. Constance Hartwell remained institutionalized until her death in 1889. According to hospital records from the Charleston facility, she spent most of her time drawing pictures of 2 girls holding hands before a mirror. She never spoke coherently after 1863, but she sometimes sang, and the nurses noted that her singing had an unusual quality, as if 2 voices were coming from one throat, creating an impossible harmony that made them uncomfortable to hear. The Hartwell plantation was abandoned after the war. The house, what remained of it, was eventually demolished in 1887. The land was divided and sold. The cemetery was left intact, but without markers. The graves of Margaret and Catherine Hartwell were forgotten, their exact locations lost to time and overgrown vegetation. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn. Because the Hartwell twins were not the only case of split births in Wilkes County. In 1889, 26 years after Margaret and Catherine died, another set of twins was born in Washington, Georgia. The parents, who had recently moved from Virginia, named them Sarah and Emma. And within weeks, the same symptoms appeared. Perfect synchronization, shared sensations, the strange harmonic vocalizations. The parents, terrified by what they were witnessing, consulted local historians and discovered the story of the Hartwell twins. They moved immediately, fleeing to California before the girls were 6 months old, and they never returned to Georgia. In 1903, another case, twin boys in Athens, Georgia, who showed the same signs. Their parents sought help from medical experts in Atlanta, who had no explanation. The boys died in a house fire when they were 2 years old, a fire that started mysteriously in their nursery while they slept. In 1917, twin girls in Savannah. In 1931, twin boys in Macon. In 1948, twin girls in Augusta. Each time, the same symptoms. Each time, the children either died young or disappeared from historical records, as if their families had learned to hide them, to erase all evidence of their existence rather than face the truth of what they were. And here is what historians and researchers have never been able to explain. Every single case of split births in Georgia can be traced back to families with some connection, however distant, to the Hartwell family. A cousin who married into another family. A business relationship that created distant kinship. A servant who moved from one household to another. The connections are thin, but they are there. As if whatever created Margaret and Catherine Hartwell had entered the bloodlines of Georgia's old families and remained there, dormant, waiting for the right combination of genetics and chance to manifest again. The pattern has never been broken. The most recent documented case occurred in 1997, though the details are sealed in medical records, and the family has never spoken publicly. What is known comes from a leaked incident report from a hospital in Atlanta. Twin girls born with normal vital signs and no apparent abnormalities. But within days, nurses reported that the infants displayed unusual synchronization of behavior and vital signs. The parents took the children home and vanished from all public records. The hospital staff who treated the twins were required to sign non-disclosure agreements. Nothing more is known. Are those girls still alive? Are they being hidden, raised in secret, their parents desperate to prevent what happened to the Hartwell twins? Or did they meet the same fate as all the others, dying young, their bodies buried in unmarked graves, their existence erased from official records? No one knows. No one will say. But here is what you need to understand. The Hartwell twins were not an anomaly. They were the first documented case of a phenomenon that has never stopped occurring, a phenomenon that suggests something fundamental about the nature of human consciousness, about the possibility that a single soul can be distributed across multiple bodies, and about what happens when those bodies try to reclaim their original unity. The medical establishment has no explanation. Psychology offers no framework. Science cannot study what it cannot observe, and split births remain hidden, concealed by families who understand that what they are raising is not simply twins but something else, something that will inevitably try to merge, to become whole, to complete the unification that was interrupted at birth. And here is the most disturbing part. What if the merging succeeds? What if, somewhere in Georgia right now, in a locked room that no one else enters, two children are standing before a mirror, watching their reflections move independently, reaching toward each other across the glass, and what if this time no one stops them? What if this time the process completes and the unified self finally emerges? What would it be? Still human? Or something new, something that has never existed before, something that holds the memories and consciousnesses of two separate lives, but experiences reality as a single entity? Would it be stable? Would it be sane? Or would it be like the stories suggest, hungry, desperate, filled with a rage at having been separated, determined to find others like itself, to spread whatever condition created it, to ensure that it is not alone in its impossible existence? The families who hide these children never tell. The researchers who discover evidence of split births find their work mysteriously defunded or discredited. The medical professionals who witness these cases sign agreements and never speak. The phenomenon remains hidden, buried beneath layers of secrecy and denial, visible only to those who know what signs to look for. But the signs are there. They have always been there. In the historical records that mention twins who died mysteriously young, in the family trees that show strange gaps and unexplained disappearances, in the old plantation houses of Georgia, where rooms on the second floor remain locked, and stories are told in whispers about children who were not quite right, who did not survive their third birthday, who sometimes appear in photographs taken decades after their supposed deaths, always in the background, always in pairs, always holding hands. The Hartwell twins have been dead for over 160 years, but what they were, what they represented, has never died. It continues, generation after generation, hiding in bloodlines, waiting for the specific combination of circumstances that allows it to manifest. And perhaps that is the real horror of this story. Not that Margaret and Catherine Hartwell were born as something impossible, but that they were not unique, that the phenomenon that created them is still active, still producing children who share more than genetics, more than appearance, more than a birthday, children who share a soul. You know the signs now, the perfect synchronization, the shared sensations, the way they seem to occupy the same space despite being in different bodies, the harmonic vocalizations, the obsession with mirrors, the way their reflections sometimes move independently. If you ever witness these signs, you will face the same choice Dr. Hartwell faced. Do you separate them, knowing it will kill them both? Do you allow them to merge, not knowing what will emerge? Or do you do what most families have done, hide them, lock them away, pretend they do not exist, and pray that whatever they are trying to become never fully manifests? There is no good choice. There has never been a good choice. Only the choice between one horror and another, between one form of death and another, between the loss of two children and the possible emergence of something that should never exist. The Hartwell plantation is gone now. The cemetery was bulldozed in 1972 to make way for a shopping center. The graves of Margaret and Catherine Hartwell, unmarked and forgotten, lie somewhere beneath the parking lot of a supermarket. People shop there every day, unaware that they are walking over the remains of two children who were and were not twins, who lived for 19 months as two halves of an impossible whole, who died trying to merge back into unity. But sometimes, and this is documented by multiple witnesses over multiple decades, sometimes shoppers see two girls in the store. They are holding hands. They are wearing old-fashioned white gowns. They are smiling the same smile, at the same angle, with the same expression. And when anyone approaches them, they turn and walk away, moving in perfect synchronization, their steps aligned down to the inch, until they reach the far wall of the store and simply vanish, as if walking through the wall into some space that exists parallel to our own. The store manager has stopped responding to these reports. The security cameras capture them sometimes. There are 17 recorded instances between 1998 and 2023, footage that was never released to the public, but exists in the files of a private security company that handles the shopping center's surveillance. The footage has been examined by video analysts, by technicians looking for signs of tampering or digital manipulation. They found none. The images are real, captured on multiple cameras simultaneously, showing two girls in antique clothing walking through a modern supermarket, their movements identical, their forms casting shadows on the floor despite their translucent appearance. But here is what the analysts noticed that makes the footage truly disturbing. The girls appear on cameras in different parts of the store at the same time. Camera 3 shows them in the produce section at 8:47 p.m. Camera 9 shows them in the cereal aisle at exactly 8:47 p.m. Camera 12 shows them near the pharmacy at exactly 8:47 p.m. 3 locations, the same moment, the same girls, moving in the same manner. As if they are not bound by the normal rules of space, as if they exist in multiple places simultaneously, or perhaps in no place at all, their image merely pressing through into our reality at random points like light through holes in a curtain. The footage has never been explained. The security company maintains it in a locked file cabinet, shown only to new employees as a training exercise in unexplained phenomena documentation. They are told to report such sightings but never to investigate them. They are told that some things are better left alone. But the Hartwell twins are not alone in that supermarket. Because if you know what to look for, if you study the footage carefully, frame by frame, you can see other figures in the background. Always in pairs, always holding hands. Always children, though they wear clothes from different eras. 1920s dresses, 1940s shorts and shirts, 1960s jumpers. Different decades, different families, different names in life. But the same phenomenon, the same impossible existence. All of them drawn to this place, this parking lot built over a forgotten cemetery, as if the graves beneath still called to them, as if death never fully severed their connection to this spot, where they tried and failed to become whole. Are they trying to merge even in death? Are they drawn together by some instinct that survives beyond the grave? Or are they simply trapped, doomed to eternally exist as incomplete beings, forever reaching toward a wholeness they can never achieve? No one knows. No one wants to know. But the phenomenon has spread beyond Georgia. That is what the sealed medical records suggest, what the pattern of cases implies. Because families move, bloodlines disperse, and wherever someone descended from those old Georgia families settles, wherever they have children, there is a chance, small but real, that the split birth phenomenon will manifest again. There are documented cases in Texas, in California, in Illinois. There are rumors of cases in Canada, in Mexico, in countries across Europe where Confederate families fled after the Civil War. Each case is hidden, suppressed, buried in sealed medical files and family secrets. But the pattern persists. In 2008, a research psychologist at Duke University began compiling data on what she called extreme twin synchronicity. Dr. Rebecca Marsh collected reports from pediatricians, child psychologists, and family counselors across the southeastern United States, looking for cases where twins displayed unusual levels of behavioral and physiological coordination. She identified 47 cases over a 20-year period that met her criteria for pathological synchronization. Dr. Marsh's research was never published. Her funding was mysteriously withdrawn 3 months before her planned publication date. Her data files were corrupted in what was officially ruled a computer malfunction, though IT specialists could find no technical cause for the data loss. Dr. Marsh herself died in a car accident in 2009, just 6 months after her research was terminated. The police report says she drove off a bridge late at night, though witnesses reported that her car appeared to swerve deliberately, as if avoiding something in the road, though no obstruction was ever found. Her personal notes, discovered in her home office after her death, contained only one final entry, dated 3 days before the accident. They found out. The families found out what I was doing. They called me. They told me to stop. They said some things are meant to stay hidden, that there are good reasons these cases don't get documented, that the world is not ready to know what these children are. They said if I published, they would prove I was wrong by any means necessary. I don't think they were threatening my reputation. I think they were threatening me. Who are they? The families who hide these children? Or something else? Some organization that monitors for split birth cases, that ensures they remain secret, that perhaps even intervenes when the children threaten to merge? There are hints of such an organization in the historical record. References in old letters to the Watchers or the Committee. Mentions in private journals of those who maintain the boundaries. Dr. Hartwell's correspondence includes one cryptic letter from his colleague in Virginia. Do not pursue this investigation further. There are those who monitor such cases, and they do not welcome outside inquiry. They believe that knowledge of this phenomenon could be dangerous if widely known, that desperate parents might attempt to force mergers or prevent them in ways that could have catastrophic results. They may be right. I urge you to destroy your records and speak of this to no one. If such an organization exists, it has left no official trace. But the pattern of suppression is consistent across decades and locations. Research gets terminated, files get corrupted, witnesses become reluctant to speak. Medical professionals who encounter split birth cases often leave their positions shortly afterward, taking jobs in different specialties, as if they want to forget what they witnessed. Is there truly an organization, or is it simply the collective action of frightened families, each independently choosing to hide their impossible children, each unknowingly participating in a conspiracy of silence that has persisted for over a century and a half? Perhaps it does not matter. The effect is the same. The phenomenon remains hidden. The cases remain undocumented. And somewhere, right now, in a locked room that no one else enters, 2 children are staring at their reflection in a mirror, watching themselves move independently, reaching toward each other across glass and space, and the fundamental boundaries that separate one consciousness from another. What will happen when they succeed? There is one account, unverified, possibly apocryphal, but persistent in the literature of paranormal research, of a successful merger. The story comes from a deathbed confession made in 1957 by a woman named Elizabeth Cordell, who claimed to have been a nurse at a private psychiatric facility in Virginia in 1919. According to the confession, recorded by a priest and donated to church archives after his death in 1983, the facility had been housing twin boys who displayed extreme synchronicity. The boys were 7 years old. They had been institutionalized since age 3, when their parents, unable to cope with their condition, had them committed to what was essentially a private prison for inconvenient children. The boys spent their days in a secured room with a single window, eating the same food at the same moment, speaking in perfect unison, moving with such synchronization that staff members sometimes became disoriented watching them, unable to track 2 separate individuals because the boys seemed to blur into a single entity. Elizabeth Cordell was assigned to their care in March 1919. She described them as, quote, beautiful and terrible, with intelligence that seemed to operate on a level beyond normal human cognition. They could solve complex mathematical problems despite never having received education. They appeared to know things they had no way of knowing, the contents of letters before they were opened, the outcome of events before they occurred. But most disturbing was their insistence that they were not 2 boys, but one person trapped in 2 bodies. They told me they remembered being one. Cordell's confession states, they said that before birth they had been a single consciousness, and that the division into 2 bodies had been agony, like being torn in half while remaining aware of both halves. They said they dreamed of being whole again. They begged me to help them merge. Cordell, moved by pity and convinced that the boys were suffering, made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She obtained a large mirror and installed it in their room, despite the facility's strict prohibition on mirrors for these particular patients. She did not understand why mirrors were forbidden. She only knew that the boys had asked for one, pleading in their synchronized voices, promising that if she gave them a mirror, they could finally be free. The next morning she found them before the mirror, holding hands, standing so close together that their bodies were touching. They were not moving, they were not breathing. For a moment, Cordell thought they had died standing up. Then she looked at their reflection. In the mirror, there was only one child, not an optical illusion, not a trick of the light. A single boy, standing where two boys stood in reality. The reflected child had features that combined both boys, one's nose, the other's eyes, a mouth that seemed to shift between both familiar faces. And as Cordell watched, frozen in the doorway, the reflected child moved. It raised its hand in a gesture the physical boys were not making. It smiled, though the physical boys' faces remained blank, and it spoke, though no sound came from the physical boys' mouths. "Thank you." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, resonating in Cordell's bones rather than her ears. Then the physical boys, the bodies standing before the mirror, simply collapsed, like marionettes with cut strings. They fell to the floor in identical positions and did not move again. Both were dead. The medical examiner found no cause of death. Their hearts had simply stopped simultaneously, their brains ceasing activity at the same instant, as if someone had thrown a switch that governed both bodies from a single source. But here is what Cordell never told anyone except the priest in her final confession. For 3 days after the boys died, she continued to see the reflected child in that mirror, not when she looked directly at it, but in her peripheral vision. A boy who was and was not the twins, standing in the glass, watching her with eyes that held twice the normal intelligence, twice the normal awareness. On the 3rd day, hospital staff finally removed the mirror, wrapping it in black cloth, and storing it in the basement. Cordell never learned what happened to that mirror, but she said that for the rest of her life, she could not look at her own reflection without sometimes seeing, for just a fraction of a second, another face looking back. The face of the merged child. The unified self that should never have existed. Watching her through every mirror, every reflective surface, as if it had not truly died, but had instead become something that existed in reflection, in the space between reality and image, forever trapped in the place where it had finally achieved wholeness. Was the story true? The priest who recorded it believed Cordell was sincere, but no record exists of such a facility in Virginia in 1919. No death certificates for twin boys matching the description. Like so much of the split birth phenomenon, it exists only in testimony, in sealed files, in stories told in whispers and recorded in private journals that surface decades after everyone involved has died. But here is what makes the story impossible to dismiss. There are other accounts from other locations, other decades, of merged children appearing in mirrors. A case from Ohio in 1936, another from Louisiana in 1954, a third from Oregon in 1971. Different families, different children, but always the same pattern. Twins who displayed extreme synchronicity, a mirror, a merger, death, and afterward, witnesses who reported seeing something in the mirror that should not exist. A child who was 1 and 2 simultaneously. A face that shifted and changed, holding the features of both original children. A presence that seemed aware, intelligent, trapped in the realm of reflection. Are they truly trapped there, or have they transcended physical existence entirely, becoming beings that exist in that liminal space between reality and reflection, able to observe our world but not interact with it except through glass, through mirrors, through any surface that creates an image of what is real? And what are they watching for? Are they simply existing, content in their achieved wholeness? Or are they waiting, looking for other split births, other children attempting to merge, hoping to guide them toward the same transformation? Or perhaps they are looking for a way back, a way to reclaim physical form, to become Not just reflections, but real entities walking in our world. The possibilities are more terrifying than the known facts. But we must return to Margaret and Catherine Hartwell, because their story has one final twist that connects all these threads together. In 2019, a construction crew was excavating the parking lot of that supermarket in Wilkes County, preparing to expand the building. They dug down through asphalt and concrete, through layers of earth and fill, until they reached older soil, the original ground level from the 19th century. And there, 3 feet below the modern surface, they found a metal box. The tin box. Dr. Hartwell's sealed repository, hidden not with his body but buried in the cemetery itself, placed between where his daughters' graves had been. The box that supposedly contained his journal and correspondence. But when the construction crew opened the box, against the protests of local historians who wanted it examined properly, they found that it was empty. Not empty in the sense of being cleaned out, but empty as if nothing had ever been inside. The interior of the tin box showed no signs of decay, no residue of paper or ink, no evidence that anything had ever been stored within it. The metal was pristine, showing no rust despite being buried for over 150 years. How was this possible? The box was sealed with solder that showed signs of age consistent with 1863 manufacturing techniques. The soil around it was undisturbed, showing no signs of previous excavation. By all evidence, the box had been sealed and buried in 1863 and had remained sealed and buried until 2019. So where were the journals? Where was the correspondence? Where was the evidence that Dr. Edmund Hartwell had meticulously documented his daughter's existence and his attempts to understand what they were? 3 theories have emerged among the small community of researchers who know about the Hartwell case. Theory 1. Dr. Hartwell never placed anything in the box. His journal entry about sealing his documents was itself fiction, a misdirection, and he destroyed everything before his death, leaving the empty box as a decoy. Theory 2. Someone else found the box first, decades or even a century ago, removed the contents, and carefully resealed the box to hide the theft. Theory 3. The contents were never physical to begin with. The box was sealed empty deliberately, as a message or a warning, and what Dr. Hartwell actually preserved was not documents but something else entirely. Something that could not be contained in paper and ink. The third theory is supported by one disturbing piece of evidence. The interior of the tin box, when examined under microscope, shows microscopic scratches forming patterns. The patterns are not random. They appear to be letters, words, perhaps entire sentences etched into the metal with impossible precision, as if someone had written there using a tool that could inscribe at the molecular level. The words are difficult to read, requiring specialized equipment and techniques. But researchers have partially decoded the message, and what they have translated so far reads, "They are not gone, they are waiting, they are one now, and they are watching. Do not look for them in the ground, look for them in the glass. They have found the way, they have merged, and the message ends there, incomplete." As if whoever was writing it, if it was writing and not some artifact of the metal's composition, had been interrupted, or had chosen not to finish the thought. What were they going to say? They are watching? They are hungry? They are coming back? No one knows. The box is now stored in a climate-controlled vault at the Georgia Historical Society, classified as an artifact of unknown origin and purpose. It is not on public display. It is not mentioned in official catalogs. If you ask the archivists about it, they will tell you they have no knowledge of any tin box from the Hartwell plantation. But it exists, and the message exists, and somewhere in that parking lot in Wilkes County, beneath the asphalt and concrete, beneath the layers of earth and time, the remnants of Margaret and Catherine Hartwell lie in their unmarked graves, still separated as they were in death, still incomplete. Or are they? Because here is the final piece of the puzzle. The detail that ties everything together and suggests that the true horror of the Hartwell twins may not be what happened in 1863, but what is happening now. Every witness who has reported seeing the twin girls in that supermarket describes them the same way. White gowns, holding hands, same smile, moving in perfect synchronization. But there is one detail that appears in every report, a detail so subtle that it was not noticed until a researcher compiled all the witness statements and looked for patterns. The girls are getting older. In the first sighting in 1998, witnesses described them as, quote, very young, maybe 2 or 3 years old. In reports from the early 2000s, they were perhaps 5 or 6. By 2010, witnesses estimated them at 8 or 9 years old. The most recent report from 2023 describes them as young teenagers, maybe 13 or 14. They're aging. Despite being dead for over 160 years, despite existing only as apparitions or reflections or whatever they are growing up, as if death did not end their existence but merely transformed it, and they continue their development in whatever realm they now inhabit, moving towards some maturity, some completion, that they never reached in physical life. And if they are still aging, still developing, then what happens when they reach adulthood? What happens when whatever process they are undergoing completes itself? Will they remain trapped in reflection, harmless haunts in a supermarket built over their forgotten graves? Or will they find a way to return, to manifest fully, to reclaim physical existence as the unified being they were always meant to become? No one wants to answer these questions. No one wants to consider the possibilities. But the evidence suggests that Margaret and Catherine Hartwell are not finished, that their story did not end in 1863, did not end with separation and death, but continues still, progressing towards some conclusion that we cannot predict or prevent. And they are not alone. Every merged twin, every split birth that successfully achieved unity before death, may still exist in this state. Dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, all aging slowly in the realm of reflection, all moving toward some transformation that might allow them to return. What will happen when the first one completes the process? When a merged consciousness, having existed for decades or centuries, in the space between reality and reflection, finally discovers how to cross back into our world. Will it arrive as a child, as an adult, as something in between? Will it be human still? Or will it have become something else, something shaped by its long existence outside normal physical constraints? And most disturbing, will it remember being human? Will it remember being 2 children who loved each other, who only wanted to be whole? Or will it remember only the separation, the agony of being torn apart, the long years of incomplete existence? Will it be benevolent, grateful, simply to exist? Or will it be angry, hungry for something it can never fully have, determined to ensure that no other split birth suffers as it suffered? These questions remain unanswered. But they are not academic questions. They are urgent questions, pressing questions, because the evidence suggests that the return is coming, that the merged twins are preparing for something, that their presence in mirrors and reflections is becoming more frequent, more sustained, more physical. In 2021, a teenage boy in Atlanta reported that he saw 2 girls in his bathroom mirror. They were holding hands, smiling, wearing old-fashioned white gowns. But here is what makes this sighting different from all the others. When he reached out to touch the mirror, one of the girls reached back. Not just a reflection mimicking his movement, but an independent action. Her hand pressed against the glass from inside, and for a moment, he swears this is true, he could feel warmth against his palm, as if there was real flesh touching his through the impossible barrier of the glass. He pulled his hand away in terror. The girls watched him for a few more seconds, still smiling that identical smile, and then they faded. But when he looked at his palm, there was a mark, a small red mark like a handprint, that remained for 3 days before finally disappearing. The boy told no one except an online forum dedicated to paranormal experiences. His post was met with skepticism and jokes, but 2 other people responded to his post, claiming they had experienced something similar. One in California, one in England. Different mirrors, different dates, but the same experience. Two girls in white gowns, one reaching back when touched, leaving a mark that faded after days. The girls in the mirrors are becoming more real, more substantial, more able to interact with our world, as if the barrier is weakening, or as if they are learning how to manipulate it, to push through from their side. How long before the barrier fails completely? How long before one of them succeeds in crossing over, in returning from reflection to reality, in becoming not just an image in glass, but a physical being walking in our world? And when that happens, not if, but when, what will we do? Will we welcome them, these children who suffered separation and death, and achieved unity through means we do not understand? Will we study them, try to learn from them, attempt to help others like them? Or will we fear them, hunt them, try to force them back into whatever realm they emerged from? The choice may not be ours to make, because if the merged twins are truly conscious, truly intelligent, truly aware, then they have had over a century to think, to plan, to prepare. They have watched us through mirrors, observed our world from their impossible vantage point, learned our weaknesses and our fears. They know us better than we know them. And when they decide to return, if they decide to return, they will do so on their own terms, in their own way, for their own purposes. The Hartwell twins are watching. All the merged twins are watching. Through every mirror, every window, every reflective surface, they observe and wait and grow older, moving towards some destiny that was set in motion. The moment the first split birth was torn into two bodies that shared one soul. You know this now. You have been told what was meant to stay hidden, what families have concealed for generations, what researchers have died trying to document. You know about split births and mergers and the things that live in mirrors, aging slowly toward an impossible return. This knowledge is dangerous. It marks you, the way that red handprint marked the boy in Atlanta. Because once you know about them, once you understand what to look for, you will start to see them. Not just in stories and historical records, but in your own world. In the corner of your vision when you pass a mirror. In the strange synchronicity of twins you encounter. In the locked rooms and sealed files and families who move suddenly in the night without explanation. You cannot unknow this. You cannot unsee what you now know to look for. The twins in white gowns, holding hands, smiling their identical smile, growing older year by year in the realm of reflection. They are there. They have always been there. And now, when you look in a mirror, especially in dim light, especially when you are alone, you may see them too. Standing behind you. Holding hands. Watching. Waiting. Growing older. Getting closer. Almost ready to come home.